Heyo, good morning. Hello and welcome to Reanimated, episode 286. Good grief. And my name's Stuart. This is the podcast about all things zombie. Joining me from New York, the epicenter of America, H.A. Conrad.
Hello.
Good day.
Good day.
What's new in your neck of the woods there, H.A.?
Well, in the good news category, they've opened up vaccines to everybody 30 and over here, and all of my friends, anybody who, obviously I don't have teenage friends apparently, but anybody who is 30 and over that I know of have been able to get appointments. They opened up a massive number of them, especially at like the big sites like Javits Center and things like that.
That's crazy. 30 and over, no problem getting appointments.
Nope, not at this point.
Pretty impressive.
I think it remains to be seen whether they actually, whether you see them going through, but it seems like they've got things going pretty well. On Friday, they had the highest number of vaccinations that they had conducted to date, so it was 93,000 in a day.
Hey.
So progress there.
Is that just in the city or in the whole state?
I think just in the city.
Wow.
Or maybe it was the whole, that may be New York State. So that's super positive news. On the not so positive side, they did a whole thing with the variants specific to Pfizer and the British variant that we had seen kind of making the rounds. There's a really good, the vaccines are effective at dealing with that. Not so great news is that the variant that they are seeing in South America, specifically in Brazil, which seems to be becoming the more dominant variant, it is not so good at that. So hopefully they're developing boosters and things like that, but that is part of why people need to be safe and be careful. But we're not seeing a ton of that going on here. I think everybody's like, woohoo, vaccination, and we're done. But I think it is hopeful, so I'm focusing on the optimistic news just because it is optimistic and it is good, but definitely kind of worried. Like, it feels like we're sort of on the brink of getting out of this thing, but we could pretty much go right down to it if none of these vaccines are effective against the newest variants. And
always full of the sunshine and
I know. But on the
times.
other side of things, just sort of the more recent data that came out about both Pfizer and Moderna was that you're pretty much 90% covered for the most part if you get both doses of the vaccination, and then they think, based upon the data that they have, that lasts probably about 8 to 9 months. In terms of, at that point, maybe needing a booster or something else. So the vaccination game is not over yet. And I guess my only concern is just seeing how much it's been to roll out this. And again, they'd have it in place, and hopefully they're developing all of these things. But I think people are going to get fatigued pretty easily. So I'm just worried that it's going to just kind of keep rolling along. But ultimately, pretty positive news. And in terms of vaccine effectiveness, these numbers are kind of crazy. We don't normally see this effective. I mean, usually they're pretty happy if they're around 50% effective. So the fact that it has such a high effectiveness rate is pretty good. So that's that.
Yeah.
How are you doing? What's going on? What's going on out there?
Well, just trudging along. Indoor dining and stuff like that's opened up. I think go county by county in California, and everybody's kind of in a different situation. Got some. I think Newsom said that some people were going to be basically completely unlocked pretty soon. Like everything is open, everything is good to go. But these are counties with really low populations. I think is the idea. Yeah, it seems like we're doing okay. I don't feel like we have a surge going on, although you see one happening in Michigan right now that's a little bit disheartening. I think, I'm also personally just feeling a lot of fatigue with COVID and trying to keep it all on lockdown. We went back to school this week for the kids, for my first grader. So he's back in class, and, he's happy to be in school. Like he didn't love school for kindergarten, so he's like, oh yeah, this is way better than Zoom school. Zoom school
Yeah.
was garbage. So I think it's making an immediate effect.
Well, and kids really need to hang, like it's a social
Yeah.
thing. Like kids really need to hang out with each other. So I'm not
Yeah.
shocked to hear that he's loving that. So the surge though in Michigan, also surging in Vermont, and Vermont had been a state that had been very successful in keeping all
They've never
this.
made the headlines for COVID
Yeah,
really before.
they're currently seeing the highest rates ever. And my poor sister, who is an amazing person at the job that she does, she's a palliative care nurse. Basically, virtually, like so many of her cases at the moment are all COVID related, and that is it's just truly exhausting to see and super frustrating because, especially if you're trying to be so careful and keep your family safe and whatever, and then you see all these cases, it's super depressing. So hopefully they'll be able to get that under control. That said, they did roll out the vaccination to everybody much earlier than other states, probably because they're smaller. But everybody in my family that is up there is at least on shot one, which is really happy news. So that's good.
Nice. Yeah, well, what's not so happy news, HA, is that I don't know if I would say that we are like out of line on Reanimated, but you and we reviewed last week's episode, episode 21 of Walking Dead, the extended season, and we were like, yeah, it was a pretty interesting episode. Carol chased a rat and made soup, and Daryl fixed his bike and had a bad day in the woods, right? I don't remember either of us saying like this was a garbage episode.
Well, we didn't because I
I don't
look.
think we felt that way.
I saw all these reviews and I saw people losing their minds over this and I don't necessarily agree. So, maybe
Yeah.
we have the outlier opinion on this, but we're also I don't want to say we're like weirder fans of these kinds of shows, but some of the things that you and I like is to see sort of like the normal daily something. We don't always like
Yeah.
to see the super crazy set pieces in terms of that, which I know lots of
Case
people
in
love to
point,
see.
Night Eats the World, the guy just counting his
That's,
food. We
you
were
know,
like, oh, counting food, amazing scene.
You totally read my mind because that's exactly what I was going to bring up. And in
Yeah.
fact, when I was reading these reviews, I was like, well, I guess we were showing what kind of fans Stuart and I are. And
I guess we're just
we're consistent in our weirdness in terms of liking the minutia. And look, I think that, and it's I stand by what we said before, which is that I think that the pandemic has actually allowed for some real examination of different characters and relationships between characters on various shows, but specifically The Walking Dead. You don't often get this kind of detail like in on one character just because it's such a massive cast and they have to give different people time. So I've actually, again, I'm super enjoying it. I stand by my opinion on this episode. And,
Yeah.
I welcome people who disagree to email and talk about it. I don't really, I'm fine if other people have opinions on it, but
I think what we're looking at here is certainly in the case of Eric Kane, who with Forbes has been a pretty vocal critic of late seasons of The Walking Dead. Although he used to love Fear the Walking Dead. Remember those
he
old days?
did, which is again, I have to say, I give him a bit of a side eye on that because he loved Fear in a way that nobody else did. So
He loved Fear so much
Yeah.
in like season 2 and 3 of Fear. It was like, it's the best show ever. That was him and Paul Tassi though too. I might be conflating the two of them. But so Eric Kane as a critic loves action, I think. And when you don't have like massive zombie action scenes, he's like, well, this is garbage. And I think there's more to the story to tell than just that. And you and I think, are being way more forgiving of COVID's era filming, where we're like, okay, so they can't put people together, they can't have a huge cast on screen, and we are aware of that and a little more forgiving of it than folks who are like, well, this isn't the Walking Dead that I know, and so I'm gonna throw it out the window, Yeah. So I think that also we had like 4-5 bad weeks of watching terrible things.
I was about to
one
say
after another.
we may have been primed just to love anything that comes out related to Walking Dead, but again, I still think I feel the same way. And I even feel like these episodes, especially if you think about Fear the Walking Dead and what we just sort of dealt with in terms of the world beyond. I still think that the writing and the direction is excellent. I'm still very much Team Angela, and I'm not going to back down from that opinion. I also think that, in part, that episode, we know that there's a side project coming up with these two, and I think that maybe this is helping set up a little bit of that, and maybe that's why they were delving into that. But I definitely did not have a vitriol and hate for this that apparently some people did. So, anywho, on with the show, I suppose. And the funny thing is that you found this thing, a think piece comparing The Walking Dead with the Ship of Theseus, and in fact, Bill and I just finished watching WandaVision,
Yeah.
where there was the end monologue about the Ship of Theseus.
It's the year of the Ship of Theseus,
Yes,
apparently.
and the vision, and he and I had this long conversation about the Ship of Theseus after that. So it's just kind of funny that you found this.
The gist of this article is saying, look, if you started watching Walking Dead in season 1 and now we're here, is it even The Walking Dead anymore? Which is like the premise of, Ship of Theseus. If you've replaced all the planks of wood and all the rivets and bolts, you've rebuilt the ship entirely. Is it still the Ship of Theseus if it's just built in its image?
Right.
And of course, the answer is kind of who cares? If you still like the show, then you're still watching a show called The Walking Dead and it's cool.
Right.
If you think that the show is bad now, then you probably don't think it's the Ship of Theseus. It's not quite the same response that Vision came up with, which was you are and you're not all at the same time. And to me, I'm just like, do you like the show? Then who cares if it's the same exact show? Because it's been 10 years.
It's been 10 years. I also have to point out that this is a common, I don't know, this is a common question, discussion point with graphic novels in general. If you look at any of the Marvel universe, or if you look at, and this particular graphic novel series in general, to keep something like this going as long as it did, and it's just an enormous amount of material and storylines and things like that. Things are going to change, and you are going to go into these sort of different branches of storylines and characters. I think especially, and this is much more so in sort of X-Men, and there's all sorts of different, and sort of like the MCU, especially, they have all the multiverse and all that kind of thing, and there's all these different storylines. Well, to keep some of these stories going, you have to draw on new characters, new story arcs, character arcs, and you're not going to be able to maintain that with it's like a serial story. So you're not going to be able to just maintain the same old thing all along. People get bored that way. And also you have to have some conflict, and this is just kind of, and especially when you do a show like this where they basically had to sort of pick and choose what they would do. What was the Walking Dead graphic novel? What was the Walking Dead show?
They made some changes, but it's also a show where you kill off the cast. That's part of the story.
Right,
it's part of the narrative.
And and I know it's hard. It's hard for, especially when characters become beloved. But you have to kind of keep that conflict going, or then you don't have a show anymore. And so I don't know, I think that people are being a little bit harsh in terms of this thing. And any show that goes on for 10 years, you have a moment where you're going to have to pivot and do different things. And we've seen that with different showrunners. A lot of what we talked about.
Fear the Walking Dead, that is no Ship of Theseus.
No. And so we, even when we were talking last week about the different showrunners and how hard it is to keep a cohesive feel, and to keep certain characters going. And honestly, look at what's happened with some of the main actors. We've had people just burn out, and can you really blame them? This is 10 years of a pretty grueling schedule. Doing a show like this is pretty hard. If you are an actor, you get this. Yes, it is a plum gig, especially if you're looking for just consistent work. And obviously, we've got characters and actors in the show that basically made their bones with this show. But you get burned out, and we've seen this, and then they write them off the show, and it's hard, especially when it's say really big characters like Rick and Michonne, right? I just think that they have to pivot and figure out what they're going to do. And look, they are wrapping this particular like branch of the show up. We know this. And I think that they're trying to give their due to certain characters and give them enough screen time so that people can get used to that idea. So anyway, I have no issue with what they're doing, especially now that Angela has taken over the reins. I think she does a fantastic job at. To me, it's not just about like sort of. It's not about showing sort of cell by cell of a specific graphic novel. It's getting the sort of idea of the show and examining the different ideas within whatever storyline you're going with and the characters. And she's done that, and she's been consistent with that. And it's part of why I'm such a big fan of hers is that I think she's really talented at driving those storylines forward into a place where I personally agree with. So. But again,
so who cares if it's
kind of well, and it's kind of it's a really difficult thing to do, and to keep this going for a decade, like that's unheard of, especially a show like this. So I don't know. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think like when we still have, part of the premise of this piece is like there's only like one or two actors left from first season, and that's Daryl and Carol basically, and they're in
Maggie.
such a different place than they were at the beginning. And Daryl and Carol, I mean, Carol was in the books. Daryl certainly wasn't. I don't know if Carol's character went as far as she has in the show. Maggie came around second season, right?
Oh, you're right. You're right. She was second season.
Like they're it. Like you've been describing, over this period of time, human actors have other things they want to do. Like Denai Guerrera is like, I could be an Oscar-winning screenwriter, for instance, or she's like I don't know if she's on her way to an EGOT, but she's like big in stage as well as screen. And you've got Carl or Chandler Riggs basically kind of getting fired off the show because he was phoning it in, and you're just like, yeah, you're dealing with child actors. You got what kid is supposed to put like the first half of his life into this show? So there's a lot of very reasonable things happening, and the show isn't what it was when it started, and that's okay. And I, asked and answered. I think we're good there. So should we move into Here's Negan, which is the 22nd episode of season 10?
Yeah, I think we should.
Which is a crazy number. It's the last one of the extended season, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a season finale for The Walking Dead, but it definitely tees up some good stuff. This is directed by Laura Belzy and written by David David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick. And so it's a very, as you might expect, it's a very Jeffrey Dean Morgan heavy piece. There's a little bit of Melissa McBride as Carol, and Lauren Cohan is in it. Not RJ, but Herschel Ree. And an extra called Barbara. Do we know who Barbara is? Have we ever met Barbara before?
No. I feel like we probably have, but it was just sort of an odd thing to throw in there.
It was just a sick burn to Negan for Maggie to be like, "Oh, hi, Barbara."
Yep.
And Negan standing right next to Barbara. So
not hi, Negan.
Not hi to you, Negan. I'm in middle school. I'm curious to see where they take the relationship between these two. It will be interesting. I was listening to Angela Kang's, outro. She was saying like she was kind of explaining what the looks were that they were sharing at the very end of the episode. And I don't know that I was 100% on board with what she was saying. It looked a little more hostile to me than her interpretation, which was, things are going to have to change if we're going to make this work, or something along those lines. Was Angela's kind of rosy outlook. Did you have the same vibe?
No, not quite. So,
looked a little more those malice, I felt like, in both of their faces a little bit.
There was a little bit, but maybe there's a tacit truce somewhere in there. I don't know.
Maybe we'll see. It's overall, I would say, a good article, a good episode. And Jeffrey Dean Morgan's wife, Heather Burton, is that
Hillary Burton?
She gets to play Lucille, and I think does a pretty good job. And they do have some nice.
They do have a lot of chemistry, these two.
Yeah, obviously, I guess but even as actors, I wonder if they go home and like run scenes or something. Yeah. And then on top of the people I mentioned, there's actually a fair amount of actors in this episode. There's a guy called Franklin. Freaking Laura is in this episode.
Yep.
Yeah, even Laura, played by Lindsley Register, shows up in this episode, raising some serious questions for me. Like, is she the first savior after Negan starts? Like,
Yeah,
and the episode doesn't really delve into the beginning of the saviors. It's really just it's a Negan origin story.
right.
Negan as we knew him as a savior, but she clearly is in the episode.
Yep.
And it was nice to see her because I honestly felt like they never developed her character enough. And I was kind of interested to see where she would go, but she was sadly thrown into a wall and a jail cell
Yep.
bar by Beta and did not survive, even though she was kind of a badass. And she has a great neck tattoo.
Yeah. But again, I think maybe they will do something a little bit more with the origin of the saviors here, because they do show her, and they show it was definitely a little bit of a tease because she is a very different person when he first encounters her. But it may be because of the things that happened to her because of him in this episode that maybe she ends up being one of the first saviors.
I would say she has a very different mission, but she still clocks him over the head with the bat that will become Lucille.
She does, but she's also
So I mean, she shows obviously a willingness to lay out some harm when he first encounters her. That's
right. But we'll see. Anyway, I do think that this is sort of the start of this episode is somewhat, I don't want to say humorous, but it is a little bit, because it's like Carol's taking him, after he has his weird sort of interaction, non-hello with Maggie. Carol's like taking him into the woods, almost like she's like letting a dog go free or something like that. Like,
it's very much that like that. It's an eviction without telling you that you're getting evicted, right? She's just
right.
like, oh, here's this nice cabin. Let's go inside. Here's all your stuff.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, how nice of you to move me in here. And Negan is not a dumb guy, and she kind of gives him this thing that the council's voted to banish him, and he's very quick to the draw here and is like, yeah, did they decide or are you deciding? And so it's like, and she's kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, and she's got like a very like sort of like, I have to say, in this particular episode, just how she's acting towards him, you kind of want to wipe that smile off her face. She's being very smirky and like, whatever, I don't like you, but I know that I don't know. In some ways, I kind of think she's trying to also maybe banish evidence of her semi bad decisions.
Yeah, like any she was the one who let him out of jail.
Right.
She's the one who promised him that she would get him like access to Alexandria and talk him up to the people and let him be accepted. So she made all these promises earlier in season 10, I think, and then totally reneged on them and decided to go on a vision quest after the completion of the Let's Kill Alpha mission.
Right.
And so I think this is kind of a dick move on her part. She is not following through. She acknowledges it in her interaction
but she's
with,
almost like,
with him right now.
But she's almost like tough. It's like, hey, I know that you ended up having to sleep with that creepy whisperer woman, but it's all good now. We're forgetting about that now, and you'll just sit in this cabin. It'll be great.
They're putting way more emphasis on the fact that he participated in the attack on Hilltop.
Right.
For some reason, not for some reason, because a lot of people died in the raid on Hilltop, and for some reason they attribute the success of that attack to him, to Negan's participation, and he was. I don't know that. They had a huge horde of zombies.
Right. Like, I don't know that was on him, but
the one thing I might say is when they found a couple of Hilltop scouts being hanged at the side of the road, and Daryl was like, "It's Negan. Negan did this." That was the thing I think that that was maybe an act that he had a hand in. I don't know that that's the case though. Daryl was the one who jumped to that conclusion very quickly. But yeah, I'm not so sure that as much of this blame for Hilltop really needs to land on his shoulders, except that he was undercover with the Whisperers during that time. But he felt more like a foot soldier than anything else.
Yeah.
After the battle, Beta's like, go and collect the herd. Like he's being given,
Yeah. And I mean, he was, and look, he was in deep cover, like, clearly.
Yeah. But so deep that nobody knew except for Carol.
Right. So then again, it's like, I don't know. I just think he was in a lose-lose situation in this whole thing.
Oh, totally.
But this lovely little cabin that he ends up in gives us some time for him to dive back into his memories, and they have him basically talking to his savior self, which I did kind of like seeing the savior Negan make a pop up, and just it's kind of interesting because the contrast between Negan now and Savior Negan are pretty significant.
And
And
Negan now, remember, has been in jail for at least 6 years or something. I
yeah,
think 5 or 6 years. Like it has a long time has gone by, and he's lost everything. And I really like the things that he said to the vision of himself right before he did the stupid thing and broke probably the only glass that he had in his
I
cabin.
know.
Like, what's he gonna drink out of now?
I know.
Is you're a clown, a cult of personality without a cult. And I
Yep.
thought those were also well written. They could have come off a little bit too stiff, but Morgan delivers them really
He
nicely.
does it, and not only do they do an amazing job at showing Savior Negan and current Negan, but then when we go back into his sort of like retrospective, we also see a different like Negan at the start of all of this, at the start of the zombie apocalypse, and they did. I felt like they did a really good job at showing him then, and there are you definitely get that he is a different person at that
I
point
feel
in
like
time.
there's like 5 different versions of him in this
Yeah,
episode, and I
and
didn't like really all of them as much. But I
same,
like that you could see shades of him in almost all of them. Like
right.
there's all these different versions of Negan, but and you're like, okay, so now he's kind of a combo of all of the Negans that we got to see in this episode in a way.
Right.
But the one I wasn't like a huge fan of is like simpering apologetic Negan. I don't know that you're supposed to like him, but his hair is weird. And I mean, I liked his floral shirts, but I was just like, wow, who is this guy? In some of those, it was during the apocalypse, but while he's just feeling really bad about the person he had been, those episodes were, or that those scenes were sometimes a
Well,
little hard.
I think that they were showing that mainly because we never see Negan in that level of
Right?
vulnerability, and we
Yeah.
never see him apologize, rarely.
Yeah.
And this is him definitely being beholden to another person or grateful for another person, and really just not. I don't want to say groveling, but absolutely, he is in a spot that we have never seen him before, and I think they may have gone a little over the top with it, but I did feel like it showed something very different with him.
It was mostly his hair that I had
Yeah,
a problem with.
his hair was a
It
little
was kind
weird.
of weird and feathery and sticking up, and then when he goes into badass mode, it's all slicked back.
Yeah.
And it's just like, whoa, night and day. Your hair tells so much of a story here. But like, what did you think of him going out and trying to dig up Lucille? Like, there's a really quick flashback of him asking Michonne what they've done with the bat, and she's like, "Oh, it's still out there."
Yeah. I
Did you?
think
What did you think of that?
I think that he is in his head, and in the place where he is right now. I think he needed some closure, and that is attached to a very specific time when he became Negan, basically, the
Hmm.
Negan that we knew, and eventually the Savior Negan. And I think that I'm not shocked that he went and did that. I'm a little shocked that he didn't do it earlier, honestly. But this, given where he is right now, it makes sense to me. And I kind of liked how that sort of closed the loop on that particular story, because basically, I mean, my whole thought process until like it actually happened in the episode, but I was just sort of like, well, the bat definitely wouldn't be, if it's been out there for like 6 years, even if it's like treated, that wood is not going to be okay at this point.
It's been rained on. It's been
Yeah, in the dirt.
in the dirt.
So, I think just him sort of going back throughout these memories and kind of it's a little bit of therapy for him. He's got to come to a place where he is. He's clearly not going to be Savior Negan again, but maybe he's a little bit of a combo of some different things here. And
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see now that we've seen that retrospective where he's going to go from here. But I have one big question the biggest question I have that arises from this episode is when he's dug up the bat, he's looking at it, and then we have our first flashback, and it's 12 years ago.
Yep.
12 years, HA.
Yep.
12 years is, I think, about 2 years longer than anybody has thought that the apocalypse has been going on.
Yep.
And I will refer you to fandom, website, which has there's a series timeline, that is, it's volunteer and fan deduced, but it goes back 10 and a half years, and they've kept it up to date through episode 20. I think it's the one where Gabriel and Aaron are on the road. Find one more. So at the end of one more, they think it's been 3,804 days, which is about 10 and a half, a little less than 10 and a half years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at also on with the Walking Dead fandom fan deduced wiki, Judith is 10 years old.
Yep.
And as we know, this show begins, I don't know, a few weeks before Judith's conception, if
mm-hmm.
you will. So, at most, we're talking 11 and a half years, maybe, or 11 years. So very interesting
mm-hmm.
to see 12 years ago, he is already in the apocalypse. And then we go back another 7 months and 6 weeks even.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're 7 months and 6 weeks in the past, we're hearing zombie attacks on the radio when Lucille's listening to it in the car and talking about her diagnosis. So I don't know what were you tweaking out about all that stuff too?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Like, it seems sort of weird that they did go that far back because it didn't seem to match up to me. But I don't know. I guess you could make some arguments that maybe it wasn't as far reaching. Maybe it wasn't like an immediate thing. Maybe they were in an area where they started, it was more gradual. I don't know, but agreed. It seemed a little bit, I was trying to do the math too. And the only thing that I could think is that maybe where we are currently with them is a little bit further along than we thought, which they did kind of move things forward. So
yeah,
I was also going by
all kinds of questions.
I was also going by Judith's age, but then I'm like, well, I don't know. We haven't talked about her age in a bit. So yeah. I guess possible, but agree. It felt a little like, I'm not sure about this, but
obviously they're the show.
Yeah.
they get to decide how long it's been and where we are in the timeline. But I think it's just interesting that I don't know. Yeah, like obviously, as I'm saying, the fans were kind of under the impression that we're 10 years or so in. They're adding another 2.5 years onto the timeline. It could definitely have shown up in the big time jump or since then, and none the wiser. But I thought that was quite fascinating, because when I saw 12 years earlier, I was like, oh, so we're going to go way back to when he's like a car salesman. Turns out he wasn't a car salesman. He was a gym teacher. Did we know that before?
I don't know that they have mentioned it before, but maybe we missed it. They have left. We did know about his wife because he had talked about that story. At least we knew about the cancer piece.
And I thought he had said that his wife died of cancer before the apocalypse.
Well, so in the graphic novels, she dies in a hospital bed. Like, she's dying, so I think they've retrofitted this story to give you a nice little backstory with Negan. But in the graphic novels, she's died. He's already on edge when the apocalypse happens. Like, he's already kind of a wreck. And so, and it was watching her die. That was, the pretty much, and his guilt over some of his other stuff. But and in this, they have the whole storyline where really pre-apocalypse, he is not there for her. He's kind of a loser. Although even though he had lost his job teaching because of a fight that he had, she still stands by him over that, because it was, and he gives a backstory about that too. Like, some jerk in a bar was ruining their song and he lost his mind.
Honestly, it's not the most sympathetic story.
It's not the most sympathetic story. And
she's kind of complicit in it, telling somebody to stop talking so she can listen to her song at a bar.
Right. It's like a little weird. Dude. That just doesn't happen. Sorry. But anyway, we see a lot, and I have to say that the chemistry between the two actors, obviously, for obvious reasons, is really good. You do believe it. And then she's got this whole, the cancer diagnosis, and the fact that he's just not there for her. Not only is he not there for her, but he's having an affair with her best friend. And that
was cold.
Is pretty rough. And so, like but this whole storyline I thought was pretty tragic and horrible, especially since he's still giving her treatments during all of this. She's so close, and then they have to find more.
So here's another timeline question I have for you. Since she is hearing reports of zombie attacks on the radio the day she gets her diagnosis, we don't get to see her go back for chemo treatments. But he talks about having like figured it out or learned it and the pumps stuff when he's talking to Dr. Franklin later. And I'm just like, how did they have time for like chemo appointments? In my opinion is, or my understanding of this is, as soon as Z-Day happens, it's kicked off. Anybody who's dying in your community is coming back. There isn't like, because everybody was infected. Maybe it was more gradual and spread. I guess that's not a completely answered question, but I just don't know how there's time for him to learn the ropes of, administering chemo treatments from diagnosis day, which is also potentially Z-Day.
And in fact, I wasn't sure where they were going to go with this because I kind of thought that maybe he had been held up because, zombies. But then I agree. I also thought the same thing, but I think it's just one of those things you have to kind of think maybe it was a little bit more gradual in their area and they had enough time for at least to be able to figure this thing out. And look, I think you can assume once he figures out, or once they figure out she's got cancer, he even says he never sees Janine again. He's fully dedicated to her.
Well, it's also Z-Day, the day that she confronts him about the affair. So of course he's not going to see Janine again. I don't know.
But clearly clearly they had to go.
My concept of how this thing unfolds is a little different from what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that we have to assume that they did have to go back to the doctor, that he did break it off with Janine. And that they had a little bit more time after she hears that broadcast on the radio, and they are pretty far out, even their houses. So maybe it's that it hit the urban areas more quickly, as we've even seen with the pandemic. Yeah. So maybe they were sheltered from it enough time to give them this. And that's the other thing. If she's got it looked like he was just putting stuff in her arms, but typically if you've got somebody, who's dealing with cancer treatment, they put ports in to make it easier. So I don't know, so there's all that stuff going on. But the other interesting thing though about Negan in this is that he's a little bit, he doesn't really like killing walkers. This is a very different Negan. So we're seeing him sort of
I just don't want to get used to it.
Right. And then it's like, whoa.
And Lucille is the one telling, honestly, even though she's yelling at him for being a deadbeat and buying that jacket, she's also out there shooting zombies who are, when that one zombie is kind of hard for him to beat. And she's telling him he has to go out there and take care of business. She's kind of a big driver for him.
Yeah. And then, honestly, she even, basically when their refrigerator breaks and her chemo treatments are done, she's also the one that's like, look, we tried, but it's not working. I'd rather have you hang out here with me while I die. Than have you go on a wild goose. And it's really
tragic.
And it's tragic and horrible. And look, I don't know that she's wrong because he's got this really far-fetched idea of finding this medical touring thing, which it's
turns out he's on the road for 6 weeks at least.
She wouldn't have lasted that long anyway, and clearly didn't. And so honestly, I know he was waylaid by these pre-saviors, I guess is what I would call them. But I don't.
Valak's vipers.
Yeah, I don't know that.
I wonder what that Easter egg is. Who's Valak? Why do we?
I don't know.
What's that?
Probably we should have looked it up, but in any case, I just don't think she would. I think the results still would have been the same because she seems like somebody that's going to go out on her own terms, which is what she did. And it's horrible when he comes home and finds her. That's just a nightmare. And the way that they cut this together and the editing, I thought was amazing. The one shot with him sitting, he just can't bring himself to do her in. And when he's sitting on the foot of the bed,
inches away from her, yeah.
And she's just kind of screaming or yelling or doing her walker thing. Also have to give Lucille props for, she doesn't want to wander around the house, doesn't want to put him in danger. So she ties herself up because she knows what's going to happen. And so it's kind of she is clearly a phenomenal individual and a very important motivator for him.
That note on the door I thought was extremely potent also. Please don't leave me like this.
Yep.
Oh God, yeah, I can't even imagine the grief. And what a scene for a husband and wife to have to play.
I know. But yeah, they did it well. And
Yeah,
then we see him, the aftermath of this when he, and then look, he's left these people who were in the medical sort of caravan, leaving them to at the mercy of this gang because he's going back to Lucille. So
yep.
we already see some moral gray areas here with him.
What's
And
up with the motorcycle gang letting him go though
yeah,
too?
they wouldn't have, I don't think. But anyway,
I mean, maybe we're still not that far into the apocalypse, 6 months or so, but it does feel like an extremely reasonable thing for them to do, to be like, all right, yep, thanks for your information, bye.
but he as he's leaving, he knows that they have the people that were helping him. Laura is
Hmm.
clearly being assaulted inside the camper van or whatever it is, and he just goes. But then when he comes back, and I mean, you can see that he blames himself, but he's also blaming them because he feels like they held him up and whatever. But we see him becoming Negan here, and it's interesting because the doctor who helped him is clearly of the Team Rick or that kind of variety of people. Laura, given exactly what you said, like is much more a little less like that. She's kind of like, okay, well, we just got to take care of business.
Hmm.
So it would be interesting to see a little bit more of this story to see what happens after. We, like it, because clearly the doctor didn't make it, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And honestly, this, like I've already said it, but I kind of just wish that Laura hadn't died to Beta. I think there would be cool stuff to hear from
oh
her
God,
story.
yeah.
Like she's basically the first member of the Saviors. She's his first disciple, possibly.
Well, and maybe it's because something happens more so to the doctor. I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe that for both of them, they're like, well, this is the better way to do things because good people just get like
Hmm.
trounced on. And again, like it's just one of those. I'm curious to see what happens, and it would have been cool to see her interactions with him now in Alexandria, right? So I definitely
Hmm.
felt like that was just a waste of a character because she was kind of a cool character that we never learned enough about.
It's a missed opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, but in any case, I obviously loved this episode because I love Negan. I really liked what they did with it, even if they did retrofit a few different things to it. But it
Well,
was a
we've still
nice.
got the resolution of the episode as he comes out of his reverie of
Yeah,
of like his flashbacks and hits the zombie with the bat, and it breaks immediately, and he's so happy when he finds the bat, and
I
then he's
know.
so heartbroken when it breaks, and then he delivers that kind of sweet monologue to it right as he's about to burn it, and I and we've always known, or we've known for a long time, that he conflates his wife and the bat.
Yep.
um, but I thought that was a really good monologue to like send it off and send her off and to apologize to her memory and be like, I can't believe that I didn't stay with you and that you died on your own. And
Yep.
I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and then he's resolved to get back into Alexandria or to figure something out, and so that's what he does, and he basically tells Carol, "Sorry, this isn't gonna work." And then she's like, kind of like, "Oh well, now I don't have to feel bad when Maggie kills you." So, I don't
That
know.
was the ultimate smarm from Carol.
Oh
She's just like,
God, I
well,
know.
now I have a clear conscience, so you're gonna die. It is like super hardcore, and it doesn't seem 100% like the same Carol we were just watching with the
Mm-mm.
rat stuff and the soup, and but of course it's Negan, so I think everybody's gonna be a little different around him.
Right. But again, I thought it was a very strong episode.
Yeah.
And he's a fantastic character. I think Jeffrey Lee Morgan is just an incredible actor, and so I just really enjoyed watching him. And it was very cool to see him and his wife together. They're pretty active on like Instagram and other stuff, so it
Yeah.
was definitely like a nice little touch to have them acting as husband and wife in this. So
Okay, so in that case, that sums up and finally wraps up all 22 episodes of season 10 of Fear the Walking, or not Fear, but of Walking Dead Prime. It's penultimate season, and the next season I think will be coming out probably in October. at least if the history is anything to go by. But now we've got Fear the Walking Dead, so join us for the second half of the last season for that next week on Reanimated. And if you want to let us know what you think about, well, episode 21, which 31% of people reviewed favorably, and us too, because they don't count us on Rotten Tomatoes. They should, but they don't. Let us know what you thought of that one and this one, and maybe we are too rose-colored glasses with these 4 or 6 extra episodes. But it's the end of a year-long pandemic, and I think we were all kind of pretty psyched to get back on the show. But you can do that on Twitter at ReanimatedPcast. Our email is reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and our show notes will be at reanimatedpodcast.com.
And until next time, ciao. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.